Wow, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Madison Sowards. I am the Venture Community Manager with Purdue Innovates, and I'm really excited to kick off the last day of Startup Boston Week with an amazing panel. For those of you who are in person, thank you for coming at 8 a.m. And those of you that are online, we're really excited that you've tuned in, and we hope to get some questions from you all, answer some of your questions about what it really means to be an operator, especially when we think about this transition from operator to investor. So without further ado, I want to give the panel a moment to introduce themselves. Jody, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Madison. Just want to make sure this is at the right spot. Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Jody Collier. I'm the Executive Director of Launchpad Venture Group. We are a network of angels based here in Boston, very much about forming new companies in our own backyard. We have been around for over 20 years. Today, we have 180 individual investors, and collectively, we write checks up to about $10 million collectively each year into generally 5 new companies and 20 or so follow-on rounds. We are interested in companies that really reflect the Boston ecosystem, so healthcare and life sciences, as well as tech plays, anything from clean tech to ed tech, and certainly SaaS products.
Thank you. Sophie, you next.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? My name is Sophie Panarese, and I head up platform and operations at 186 Ventures, which is a pre-seed and seed stage venture firm based here in Boston. We're relatively new. We launched our first fund in October of 21, a $37 million vehicle that we're deploying out of across all software sectors. So developer tooling, AI, blockchain, enterprise SaaS, fintech, you name it. We'll invest in it, and our average check size is between $250K and $1.5 million, all across the U.S. So some in Boston, some in New York, some in SF, LA, one in Nigeria as well. And then in terms of what I do, heading up platform and operations, a lot of it is portfolio support, and then a lot of it is scaling our VC, and that's really it.
David.
Could kind of guess I was next, right? So going down
down the line.
Yeah. So hi everyone. David Chang, angel investor and entrepreneur. My quick background is I've now been with 6 Boston-based startups. All told, raised about $150 million, sold for about $750. I was the first product manager at TripAdvisor. I ran the PayPal Boston office after an acquisition, and my most recent venture we sold to E-Trade, which was in the fintech space. I've also done about 100 angel investments, both individually as well as through a group. One of the co-founding members of TBD Angels, a collective of about 300 angels kind of scattered all throughout the country. But our big thing is that we have tons of operators within our group. And so I'm happy to share a little bit about that as the day goes on.
And last but not least, Julian.
Okay, great. Good morning, everybody. My name is Julian Chu. I am currently serving as the COO of SOS, a Boston-based startup, but I formerly was one of their angel investors and advisory board members, but decided to go, kind of join the operating team full time. Prior to that, I've been doing some angel investing as an independent investor and advising of founders and entrepreneurs, and then prior to that, I served as an operating partner at a growth stage private equity firm here in town, excuse me, called Castanea Partners, that focused on retail and consumer brands in the kind of $20 to $100 million range. So a little bit later stage for sure, but I think hopefully some valuable experience that we can talk about today.
Yeah, awesome. So we've got a really great panel of folks with all different backgrounds, and I think it's pretty representative when we think too about the terminology of operator and how that can mean different things to different people of different backgrounds. I know I've had preliminary conversations with the panelists too on what the term operator might mean to them. And in different contexts, it can mean something differently. And Julian, you're the one with operating partner in your title. So I'm curious if you want to kick us off on how you think of the term operator and what that means and looks like in that context.
Yeah, I think in private equity, it's, there's probably more of a clear division, right, between the the investment professionals in the firm, and then the operating group, which are typically folks who have, seasoned executives who have built and run companies, and that the investment firm has retained to help their portfolio companies with strategic initiatives and really serve as kind of mentors and advisors to the management teams. Whereas in early stage, well, I mean, we can see what the rest of the panel thinks, but I suspect it might be a little bit more nuanced, and you have people who have kind of hybrid roles or bring different sets of experiences to the table.
Yeah. And I think we saw the operating partner come into play a lot in the beginning with the more VC and private equity firms. And then it's brought in itself to the angels, and there's more operators becoming angels. So Jody, what do you think about the term, and how do you think about that in your context?
Yeah, thanks, Madison. I think about somebody like David, who has been part of, as he mentioned, 6 startups. He's the ideal angel investor that you want on your team because he has walked the walk. He has, built companies. He's, fallen probably into 1 or 2 potholes along the way that
I'm flawless. Never made a mistake in my entire life. So.
But when you think about somebody who could be truly of help to you, it's often someone who has already walked in your shoes and has had really tough days sometimes and has had to get in front of a group and talk about their idea and say, hey, I'd love for you to fund this. So when you speak to a group of many angels, in Launchpad and beyond have been operators, they have had the experience of building a company, and often they're people who have had several failures along the way, and that's actually incredibly helpful to talk to people who have had not only some great successes but also some losses, some failures along the way. Ask them about that. Ask them, how do I avoid some of those same little potholes that you may have fallen into along the way. And honestly, people are delighted to help, to share their stories, to really go over your thoughts with you. So operators that's how I really think about it, Madison, is people who've been there.
Yeah. And David, you're our living example here on the panel. How do you think about that, and how that's kind of shaped your path going from serial entrepreneur into the angel world, and what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I've always found the term operator kind of like a weird term, right? And so probably came into existence in the venture world maybe like 15 years ago, at least it feels like for me, where I heard that term much more. And because at first I'm like operator, I'm thinking, with the telephones and the ears and all that other stuff, right? And I think the first time someone had referred to me as an operator was someone in the venture space. And I'm just like, I didn't even identify with that term. But I think later on, what I realized was that the actual operating experience, like having been in with like another team trying to build something and to win and fail, those are things that are like very valuable to other startups. And so I got why about 15 years ago it became a term where it seemed like, at least in the venture space, there were many more early stage venture firms that were looking for people that have been there, done it before, and very recently had done that, right? Because I think a lot of early stage investors, at least institutionally, either go through the path where they've had some really big exit, but it could have been 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I think they're recognizing that people that are very plugged in right now in the industries that they care about have a ton of value. So I think that's where a lot of the operating experience comes from.
Yeah. And this crossover between founders and their real experiences and the empathy that they might bring to the table and the resources, the connections, is really powerful when we think about how an operating partner that's in an investor setting might be able to benefit the entrepreneurs. And Sophie, I know you work a lot with startups in that sense and providing resources and being a resource for them. How do you see those resources coming to play as an operator?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I guess an operator in the context of VC is really getting your hands dirty and being willing to roll up the sleeves, get in there. At the earliest of stages, these are when companies are scaling from 0 to 1. So they're facing all sorts of challenges from, figuring out their go-to-market, figuring out their ideal customer profile, trying to find additional customers to bring on board. And as prior operators, as being an operator at a venture firm, you want to roll up your sleeves. You want to be as helpful as possible. You understand that the founder is going to do 99% of the work, but if there's that 1% that you can help and take some of the weight off of their shoulders, it's on the VC to step in and be supportive and not just write a check and run away, but to really roll up the sleeves and be as helpful as possible. So in my role, a lot of it is stepping into any type of question that the founders have. No question's too small, too big. We're going to try to tackle it. And I think everyone here does the same, really.
Yeah. And what are the challenges that you find that startups are having the most that they turn to operators for?
Yeah, I think for me or our portfolio companies, for the most part, it's about expanding their network and connecting the dots for them. Oftentimes, they're reaching out to see if we know X, Y, and Z from a certain company. And if we don't, we're going to do everything we can to try to know those people on their behalf so that we can just make that introduction a little bit easier. Another big ask that we get is around fundraising, going from seed to Series A, making sure that we're lining up the right conversations for them. And again, they have to do the real work, but if we can open some doors for them, it does supercharge them a bit. So that's where I find a lot of the questions come. It's introductions and connecting networks for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would assume too that those connecting of networks can also help with a lot of lead gen for the company too, and expanding those networks, like you said. Jody, have you seen that from the angel operator side too?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the value that angels often bring, right? It's the network effect, and whether it's for lead gen for building up your client base and opening doors, or also I think very importantly is for talent and to find people to bring into your team. I mean, at the beginning, it's all about those first hires are so critical, and if angels can be helpful and know some people that they have worked with in industry that can come in, that's another key area where we can be helpful with those sorts of intros.
I think, I think a key area too is a lot of the back office and administrative stuff and all the just blocking and tackling that is required to run a business, right? That could just consume untold hours if you don't know what you're doing or you don't know who to talk to, right? But I imagine that's that's a key area that there's just make that, legal and accounting and corporate registrations and all that, insurance, all that kind of stuff. That
The fun stuff.
Yeah, all the really really fun stuff that everybody loves to work on, right? But you have to do it. You have to do it. And you have to not screw it up.
Yeah. What about the areas that operators might not be the best place to turn to? If you're a startup founder in the room and you're thinking, when would I want to work with an operator investor, and when are the best times to? On the flip side, there might be some times that you might not need the support of an operator investor. You might need someone with a different skill set. How would you guide a founder that's trying to think about when that is the right time and when it's not?
I feel like this one has to be yours, right? Because like your experience as an operating partner, you probably have some nice war stories.
The way I would answer that is like you should always be looking for operating experience and value add in your investor base, right? I mean, why wouldn't you these days, right? So what distinguishes one source of capital from another is going to be how much value they can add to your business, and so the relevancy and their ability and willingness to put that experience to work for you, right? Like how much time are they going to invest, and what kind of resources they have is a really important question when you're choosing who to take capital from. So I think it's always a good time. And then the question is, how do you leverage it, right? Because they're not going to do everything for you, right? Like if it's 1% of what's going on, then you have to be very choosy, and it's really a matter of prioritizing where do I really need the most help? Where do I need to focus as the founder and the entrepreneur, right?
Yeah.
So that depends on your own background, skill set, and where you think you need the most help. So a lot of self-awareness is important, right? As always. So.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
I would just add to that, Julian, that alignment is something that we really think about, making sure your values are aligned, that your goals are aligned, because sometimes, as Sophie said, you know your business best, and we're here to support that. But you have to just make sure you're checking yourself. It's good to be open to different ways of thinking about things. We love coachable CEOs, of course, but we also appreciate a CEO who really knows their space, who knows their customer. So just be sure to always check that alignment piece.
And what tactics have you used from the operating partner side, I guess both Jody and Julian, if you don't have a coachable founder? If you've been in a situation where a founder is interested in the help, but the coaching is a little bit more difficult. It's a tough one.
That's a tough one. I mean, I think in practice, what happens is that company or that team is going to get less attention, right?
Yeah.
Right. And so you're going to, spend your time and energy where it's, put to good effect.
Mhm.
And so that's, that's an important, so the alignment going in is
Yeah,
very important.
exactly.
Yeah. So hopefully you avoid that situation.
Yep.
Are there ways that founders might think about prepping before they work with operating partners, of getting some sort of ducks in a row, or having that willingness and that coachability? Are there any tips and advice for them as they're looking for them and beginning to work?
I would research your venture group or your angel group before you go in. Make sure you know who you're talking to. Um, you can reach out. Everybody lists all the companies that are in their portfolio, so it's not hard for you to do a bit of due diligence on us, frankly, and to make sure that it is going to be a fit for you. I think that's a relatively simple thing you can do, is lean in on your own network to see, okay, this is a company that's been funded. I have a friend over there. I'm going to just see how that experience went down. And it'll just make you, I think, a lot more aware of that alignment piece going in.
Yeah. David, any thoughts on that?
I'm still thinking about that founder that's not coachable.
You have a few in mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've probably been on both sides of the table on that one, right? Like it's a fine balance between conviction and belief of something, right? The very same skills that make you successful are the same ones that will probably torpedo you. And so, like, how do you find, like, what's the right level? And of the founders that I've worked with, the ones that maybe sometimes don't appear all that coachable, but the market maybe has proven, like, if they hear things once, they may ignore it. They hear it a second time. If they hear a third time and they still don't do anything, then that's clearly we're giving you a lot of signal and you're not taking action, in which case then, to, take a different path. Sometimes you got to replace the founder, right? And then, and for the ones that learn super fast, then they're learning. And so, I don't know, the whole thing around, like, coachability is a little bit of a dual-edged sword. And so I don't always have, it's really hard to tell from the front.
Yeah. Do you think that there is, with the evolution of an operating investor, an operating partner that has that background and has that lived experience, do you find that coachability piece and the almost experience that the operating partner might add to a credibility that they might have and make that coaching an easier relationship? Have you seen a shift in that at all? And the answer might be no. But I'm curious if that gives a bit of credibility to an investor that has walked the walk and knows exactly what the founder is going through.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I feel like this might be more of a later stage thing, but in the companies that I've been a part of where we've tapped into operating experience that an investor had, it's sometimes mixed, right? Sometimes that person has, like, very deep in a specific space, in which case then that's awesome, right? And in one case, we actually brought the person on as, like, our exec chair. So it's like, there's no bigger vote than we're going to give you part of our equity, right? We think you're so valuable. And then other times it feels like that person might be a little bit of a spy, right? And it's, like, hard to, it's hard to suss out. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, just as an operator looking at other operators, like, if they're part of a firm, like, there's just, like, naturally, like, the incentives are different. And so you have to, like, sort that out before I guess you go too deep with that.
Yeah.
I would say that that's the situation you want to avoid, though, right? Is
Mhm.
where the operating advisor or whatever that they happen to be called is really serving as a spy, as it were, as opposed to a real advisor and mentor to the management team, right? Because that's generally going to be a situation where you're going to it's going to breed a little dysfunctionality, and it's probably not the right way to set it up if you're the investor, and certainly if you're the founder, you don't want to be subject to that kind of relationship.
Yeah. Are there any red flags that you've seen that startups should look out for of determining whether or not what's they're doing their due diligence on the investor themselves, as
Yeah.
Jody recommended, of, oh, this one might be in the spy category.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's why it's important to, kind of talk with people who have experience working with a firm or, their other portfolio companies, and just understanding the culture and the personality of these people and how do they operate, and just, what the experience is like. Right. And so, you could probably find out fairly quickly what it's like and whether people thought it was a productive and constructive relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think testimonials can go a really long way. We do
Mhm.
it when we're diligencing companies, but they should definitely do it on us and talk to founders that we
Mhm.
work with and ask for concrete examples of how exactly this VC has helped in X, Y, and Z ways. So definitely, I would ask that you do diligence just as much on us as we do on you if you are a founder.
Mm. And David, I want to go back to something that you had mentioned earlier about really briefly the stage of the company and how they might work with an operating partner differently at those stages. Is there a difference between how someone might work with an operating partner in an early stage and the advantages of working at an early stage versus a later stage, especially as someone who's been through and grown companies across that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in the earliest stages, sometimes the early stage firms don't really have that person on staff, right? And so it might be the investment partner that has a deep operating experience, might be a lot of firms now have groups of operators that they surround themselves with, right? And so at a firm, you may have like 3 investing partners, like 1 or 2 platform people, and then a group of like 100 ex portfolio founders and people within their circle. And so I think at least in early stage venture, while that role typically isn't like a full-time role that someone has like on their business card, you've got access to a lot. And so I think in that scenario, it's a little bit easier to avoid the whole spy thing, right? Because like that person you're relying on isn't an employee of the firm, right? It's someone within their orbit. And so I think at least in the earlier stages, it might be a little bit more easy to avoid some of those challenges. But when I've grown companies, as part of that, you very like you rely on this network of people outside of your immediate circle, like all the time.
Yeah. And Jody and Sophie, you guys are both kind of on the more early stage side of it. Do you see that playing a role?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I feel like the other panelists have been alluding to is trust and really taking the time to get to know your investors or certainly somebody that's going to come on your board. Take time out beyond, going through your deck and talking about, your go to market and all those important things and get to know them as a person. Make sure that this is somebody that you want to really, get in bed with here because you need to be able to you'll be able to suss those things out. I would say, pretty accurately if you spend some time together, go to dinner, you just go for a long walk. Really learn their backstory and really their why for being interested in you and your company.
Yeah. I want to flip this conversation a little bit because we probably have a good variety of folks in the audience that are current founders, current operators, maybe some current investors. And I want to talk about what it means to be a good operator and a good investor for those that might think about this as a future career path for them, that might be in the operator space or be thinking about becoming an operator. And this might be their long-term goal, is to transition that career path into being a resource and having that background themselves. Julian, how would you advise someone who's going through that of what does it mean to be a good operator and where they should take those first steps?
Sure. I mean, obviously being a good operator and a relevant operator, do you have the experience and is it relevant to the audience or the people that you're trying to serve? But I think it's a lot like you have to go into it with the mindset of I am someone's advisor, I'm a coach, I am here to support them, right, and help them be successful, right, and that's got to be the basis of the relationship and how you approach it, as opposed to I'm here to pontificate and tell people what to do, right? That's just not the approach that's going to work very well in that kind of context. And so so again, if you think about it from that perspective, it's very much like being a coach or a counselor or mentor type of role, and that I think is the right way to think about it.
Yeah.
I don't know how you balance that though, right? So I don't want to get a little controversial on this. Like I find that that if you're an operator, you like doing something, right? And that something is typically a craft, right? Something that you've gotten really good at over many years, and you excel at it, you live and breathe this all the time. And then I think when you hit the point in your career where do I do something else? Do I serially go into something new? Or do I sit back and describe it as exactly you describe it, which is I have so much wealth of information and experience to share with someone else that I'm going to spend time doing it in parallel with a lot of different companies. And I find that like most people kind of are either one or the other. They either love the variety, and these are like investor types and consultant types and advisor types that like thrive on connecting the dots through lots of different places, or you're just like single track, like I got a problem I want to solve, it's just that one problem. And I find that at least in my case, and maybe it's in your case too, because like it sounded like you went back to the operating
company. That's why we're both
company,
doing
right?
what we're doing, right? Yeah, exactly.
That it's I find it's extremely hard to do both, and so you either go like you spend maybe times of your life where you're doing a little bit of this, like, and then other times you go super deep. And you joined a portfolio company. I actually joined a portfolio company when you had talked about like at the early stages where people really add value from a venture side. I think you said expanding networks, connecting the dots. You talked about talent. I ended up joining a portfolio company as well that's in that very space of helping companies grow through trusted networks and talent. And so for me, being an operator means solving one problem and doing it really well and just focused on that and nothing else. And so I find that the operator part, or like at a larger firm, it's sort of like a mix of, I mean, it's either the best of both worlds or it's the worst of both worlds. And so I don't know which of those two.
I would just jump on the back of that, David. Many of the people that end up joining a network like the one I work with, are missing that life of going in deep, and they're like, they think they've retired and they're going to play golf, and they're like, I can't do this. I need exposure. I need to use the skills that I have to just feel good and to feel useful. And it ends up being a really sort of great repository for all that knowledge. They love coming together so they can, talk to one another, learn about new technologies, and yeah, really scratch that itch of, okay, I've known a lot. I love being part of it, but I also may be at a point in my life where I don't want to go in that deep. I want to be able to, sort of pick and choose and learn, a little bit about this and learn a little bit about that, and dive in sort of on a more shallow level, frankly. But it's just so funny to me sometimes I hear that story over and over again, how much people have loved being inside of a small, early stage company. It's such a, a fun vibe and a charge to be part of growing something. And I think that's part of the motivation for doing what Julian talked about, the mentoring, the coaching, making sure that's your approach when you're talking to these companies. Yes, we would love to get a great return when we support you, but I think we really all, at this early stage pre-seed, we're leading with like, hey, I've got some energy and I want to help you with that.
I love that. I feel like we'll come back next year for the best of both worlds or worst of both worlds debates. And we can have a whole conversation about that too.
You don't need to derail the conversation.
No, it's perfect. Right. And Sophie, you also kind of went through this yourself too, coming from the operator context now into the operator investor world. What was that like for you? And what were some of those factors on joining 186 in that thought process?
Yeah, I would say that I am a much broader thinker now that we are a generalist fund. I worked at an investment advisory firm and then I went to home goods and did brick and mortar retail strategy. And now I'm at a generalist fund. So I think every operator learns as they go. And I definitely have had to teach myself a lot. And luckily, I have a great team that supports me, and they're deep operators. And we definitely show up to our founders to try to be the most founder aligned firm that we can be. But the experience for me is that I'm constantly learning. And I absolutely love that. And I'm supporting the smartest people in the world, founders who have a fundamental issue with the way the world operates today. So the transition has been winding, but incredibly rewarding for me. If there's one thing that I can do to make my founder's life a little bit easier, that's a huge win. And I think it gives me so much more energy to try to get better at my job every single day. So that's been my transition, and I've been very happy doing this role.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know we're coming through not at time. I want to make sure we leave time for questions. So if anyone in the audience has questions or anyone online, oh wow, we already do. Okay, great.
Oh, I wasn't supposed to be first. Hi, my name is Justin. Oh, hi, Kylie. I connect founders with investors every day. One of the things that I find is that whenever I'm making the introduction, there's always a precursor, like a blurb or a text that actually makes or facilitates the introduction and makes it better. So one of the things that founders can do in terms of trying to find some information about making some of these connections is, like you alluded, the website, being able to talk to portfolio companies. But how else can we get information on you guys before having that first conversation?
Mm.
What intangibles can we get, or what can we glean from some of these conversations with the portfolio companies, or what questions can we ask to be able to better facilitate some of that deal flow?
It's a great question.
Yeah, I would go back to something Sophie said earlier, which is when you're asking about how people operate, right? Ask for specific examples, like what did they do in this type of situation, right? It's like interviewing people for a job, right? You want to know how people behave in specific contexts because that tells you more than anything about what kind of people they are and what their culture and their personality is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what it comes down to. And the more you know about even the individuals, if you can target, as I mentioned, we have 180 people in our network. If you can target, okay, this is somebody who, is really deep in the space that the founder I'm working with has been in, that's the person to really ask and say, like, why Launchpad? Why would I talk to that instead of, 186 in this particular situation? And oftentimes people say, hey, this is a company that I'd like you to take a look at. And I might say, great, thank you, but it's actually better for somebody else. And so that's always the question too, is just to say, hey, if that particular, fund or group isn't the right fit, who do you know that I can talk to? So if you can just keep asking, people are just, I think my experience at least has been people are delighted to network you to the right space if we aren't the right ones initially.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a good twofold. It's a good 1-2 punch, right? As you do some, I guess it's kind of back channeling, right? As you do some digging on what this person's experience is, either because there's some data on a website that helps you point to like your portfolio, and then if you get in touch with one of those founders, you'll get a sense of who the investor is. Know that at least from the founder perspective, the number of research calls and the back channel that happens before you even do your pitch, it's pretty extensive, right? I don't know what the exact number is, but when I sat at a venture firm once as an operator, was launching a company, and so I overheard a lot of the investment partners as they were looking at new companies in. I did not realize that by the time someone comes in to do their pitch, that investment partner is likely talked to like 3 or 4 people about that person already. And so when I was on the other side, I was just like, great, here, nice to meet you, and thinking that this person's zero context. And it turns out, on average, they've already had 4 conversations about me, which was totally shocking to me, right? I don't know if it's typical, but at least for the firm that I was kind of hanging out with, that was very typical for them.
Yeah, I mean, if you're trying to develop a deeper sense, right, of who are the right firms to connect founders with, right, I would be asking the firms, right, outside of the objective criteria that's listed on your website, right, what are the 3 things that are not on your website that are your, at the very high on your criteria list? They're probably subjective criteria, right? Like what have you not published that is very high on the list of your screening questions when you're thinking about who to talk to and who to consider. Mm-hmm.
We have another question up front.
Hi, this is a super helpful panel. So I've been an investor in private equity for like 20 years, and now I'm running a startup. So could you guys opine on when the incentives are aligned and everything's going fine, and everybody's financial incentives are aligned, there are not a lot of issues. But often, especially in earlier stage, you'll get to a point where the founders still have a meaningful amount of the company, and selling it to a strategic for $50 or $100 million is a great outcome for them. But in venture, it's not. And the numbers would suggest that the vast majority of venture investments are the wrong investment decision, and that's the model. So do you have any advice on how you manage that with founders? So when the financial incentives are misaligned, and the venture investors are going to have a conversation about like the math, and all the qualitative stuff kind of goes out the window for the most part, and they're just figuring out, okay, I made 10 bets. What are the 2 or 3 where I'm going to put more money behind them? And often operating partners are kind of a liaison. So any thoughts you have on the really, really hard situation that arises there would be great.
Other than recapping the company, I mean, like,
if you're a confidant to the founder, I think a lot of operating partners act as this sort of like bridge between just the money and the, emotions, all the stuff that goes into running a startup. And I'm wondering if you have any experience.
Obviously,
there.
a lot of it depends on the situation, who's got voting control, and at the end of the day, who's making the decision, and how many, is it a collective? Do we have to have consensus on the board or not, right? Yeah. Hmm.
Operating partners may have more incentive, one way or the other as well, but it's a tricky one.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to, it starts with really understanding where everybody's coming from, right? And being very, hopefully transparent about it. And we're having open conversations about, look, this is what I think and why. This is what I'm trying to achieve. This is the outcome I'm looking for. And, sometimes they diverge, right? And that needs to be addressed somehow.
I guess I've seen 1 or 2 cases where, as part of, I guess not really restructuring the company, but like as part of realigning incentives, that you enable like whatever is the next round, if it's a strategic, like taking some money off the table and getting it back to the founders, so that, let's say the founders, 2-person founding team, they've been struggling, barely paying themselves for 5 years, and they're like that $30 million exit, it looks awesome, right? And so if they take some of that off, it seems like then you can realign incentives going forward. So I've seen that a couple times. And I guess the other thing that, it's not really advice for founders, but the other thing I've seen is that even when you've got founders that are generally aligned, investors are generally aligned, it seems like the investors themselves have their own different timelines for where their funds are. And so I've seen other cases where one person on the board was like, I got to get a win, so this is great enough for me. Another one's like, I got a lot of dry capital, and let's shoot for the moon kind of thing. And then you have these like weird incentives even within like your own board. And so I don't know how to coach a founder to that, other than trying to find that middle ground.
Maybe you coach the board then.
Yeah.
Good morning. My name's Bobby Lamont. I'm an angel investor with Maine Angels. And my question's really on the angel side of things. A lot of us are mission oriented. We've heard a lot about operators tonight. I was wondering if anyone has any good, juicy anecdotes about the unsmooth connectors, people like me who do not come, from a business background, has not been a founder, yet has found a role around the table. Can you speak to the having diversity around the table and having people who aren't operators working with operators together?
I'd love to tackle that, and maybe
Yeah,
just
go
to
ahead,
start
David.
off.
Yeah.
Part of the thesis of the Angel Group that we co-founded was that we do have a ton of operators, but we're finding that folks that don't have that have maybe like functional expertise that has a tremendous amount of value. And so I do find that on any given investment, I got to believe your
Yeah,
group
for
is also
sure.
like this too, where you may have one person that like knows an industry really deeply and they kind of wear the operating hat. You may have someone who like functionally really understands, we'll just call it an attorney, for example, right? Like maybe they haven't had an operating role, but they really understand the mechanics of like one part. We have ex venture folks that are also angels that they've never had operating roles, and so it does seem like if you get a collective of people with diverse backgrounds and experiences, there's a better outcome on the other side. And so I think we found a way to mix operators and non-operators, which I think even reflects in terms of like how we find our own deal flow and our own mix of like founders that we backed. And so I think about 35% of them are women founders, right? And that's typically because we're sourcing from that same group. And so like our composition of our group largely reflects the inbound deals that we have. And so I think we've at least found a way to like mix different experiences in a way that I think is a value add to early stage founders.
Yeah, just piggybacking on that. Yeah, our strength is our diversity, right? And having people that can look at a problem in a different way is, I think, it's what makes us better investors, certainly. And everyone's bringing their own life experience. And sometimes, I think of one of our angel investors, never went to college, worked for her dad as like he had an accounting firm in Roxbury, and was, going to work with him every day to do the books for a mechanic and a dry cleaner. And, she realized that she had a real knack for talking to people and to talking through business problems. And, she's done extremely well as a coach and a team facilitator. So the knowledge she brings as a person who just really can understand what makes humans tick. I mean, because that's really ultimately the problem that every company faces, right? Is how do we take all these wonderful resources of the people in the team and make them work? Is really it's just as valuable, if not more valuable than the MIT grad that has had 6 exits and whatever, that is really deep in AI, blah blah blah. She can look at it in a different way that has really important additive to the group. And I would say not to be in any way intimidated if you are what you would call sort of a non-traditional angel. There's room for everybody. And we need everybody. And as David said, we need diversity of gender, of race, of life experience, and certainly of industry knowledge. That's really a positive. So look for places where you're going to get education, where there's going to be an openness. And I would say, the groups that we work with certainly would welcome people that have a slightly different approach.
Hi, my name is Laura. I'm a founder in mental health. So modality, we're building infrastructure for paraprofessional mental health, and we're very early, and I'm finding the ecosystem and people very generous. So my question is about formalizing advisor relationships and your kind of, if you have specific sort of best practices that you've arrived at in your career, because it's really important to me as a founder that it feels like it's like formalizing it is moving at the pace that people want, but everyone is very different. It seems very individualized. So I would love to hear from you, just wisdom that you've gained, whether you've been an advisor yourself or have heard of ways to make it go well and smoothly and things to kind of avoid. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, I would say in my experience as an advisor, right, I think the relationships that work the best are where there's structure, right, to the relationship, and it's not amorphous. We have a regular cadence for how often we're talking, what we're working on, even better if there's specific projects, because I like to get my hands dirty, right? So, right, if we're just talking and we're just, having coffee on a regular basis, but not actually getting anything done, that's less interesting to me. So, so having really specific problems to work on together where I feel like I'm adding value to you, and then of course in a structure where I can, I know exactly how much time I'm going to be, committing, and we can fit this in, and it's not like I can be responsive when you need me, right? Having that all kind of figured out generally makes for a better relationship.
Laura, the one other thing I'll toss in there is, nice to see you, by the way, is that I do think at the early stages, you're going to have a long list of fans and supporters that don't have to be formalized. In fact, one mistake that I've seen in early stage founders is they issue formal agreements, advisor agreements, to like the first 3 people that they meet. They're like, oh, that person seemed great, you're gonna be advisor. And then by the time they find, like, they're doing 4 or 5 of those, they're not actually adding the value that you're expecting, right? To Julian's point, like, it should have some structure to it. So I think maybe rough rule of thumb in the early days, for every 1 formal advisor, you probably have like 4 or 5 informal ones. Maybe it's a founder that you like to talk to every now and then, that investor that isn't on your cap table, but it just knows the space and is a fan of what you're doing. If you're a student founder, like former professors, that kind of thing. And so, like, I think be pretty choosy before you formalize that agreement. And when that happens, it's like a dating thing, right? Like when it happens, then put on paper with some more clarity as to what your expectations are, ranging from the maybe 0.5% of equity, where every month it's like a 30-minute call kind of thing, to the, actually you're going to spend like a day a week, right? And that's a very different kind of relationship. And so I just want to be clear up front, like, what's the depth of that? And just wait before you actually kind of formalize that.
Yeah, and it.
How would you reply if someone were pressuring you to formalize it before you feel that it's ready?
You're leaning in there?
I was.
Yeah.
Now I'm leaning out. If they're pressuring you, well, I think then it's a two-way street. So if you are not positive that they will add the right amount of value that you're looking for, maybe that can be more of a contract that you create that isn't necessarily here's equity up front, but if you do X, Y, and Z, and this relationship is going well, then a contract can be created. So it's you have to vet them, right? And really do your diligence and work with them, see how you guys work together, and then go from there. But signing that contract day one, I wouldn't recommend. If you do find an advisor that you really want to work with, we've created some type of a compensation rubric depending on the stage of company that I'm happy to share with you after this, if that's helpful.
We do have one online question here that is asking specifically from an international founder. And when they're thinking about bringing their business to the US, how they might work with investors, how they might work with operator investors, specifically on how they might be able to launch taking their company into US markets. Any thoughts on that? I think my initial thought too, if I can offer even a suggestion, we talked a lot from the panel perspective about finding operators that are passionate about solving problems, that have experiences, maybe bringing a company to the US themselves. So do your research, do some due diligence, as Jody suggested, and see if you can identify investors that might have that experience and can guide you through that process because they've walked that path before. So that would be my tip. While everyone else
Yeah,
thinks.
my immediate reaction was, well, you need to come here first. That would be my first step. Come to the US and have a presence.
Yeah.
And get boots on the ground somehow, right? It doesn't have to be you yourself, but maybe you have a representative or a member of the team that is going to be present, because there's really no substitute.
Yeah. Any other thoughts?
The presence is a little, or the way that the question is it on the screen? Oh, so
It's
yeah, it
not
is
on the screen.
The question about, like, when the global companies failed, like that immediately is like, and you want to launch in the US, like that's already positioning that as something like, I don't really, like there's just so much hair on that. Like, I would almost present that a little differently if, and yeah, so I think finding, to Jillian's point, like you do need to be in that market in the beginning to establish that credibility. And I almost wouldn't mention that it failed somewhere else, right?
Yeah, I would say I'd appreciate the honesty, but there is a different way to market yourself. And we get the question sometimes like, hey, we want to present to you, and if you fund us, we will move to Boston. And our answer to that is kind of what Julian was alluding to. We want you to come here first, and because Launchpad is very much about companies in this particular geography. It's not like, oh, yeah, you can't, I would say don't expect that the money will come first and then you can come second. I would say if this is where you want to be and you want to establish your team and there are reasons for that, then, certainly do so. But this is it's just a tough question to George here on the screen. Like I said, the candor is important, and sharing with potential investors sort of what's gone down, so how do you define failure? What does that mean? How is this new venture going to be different than the one that may have gone sideways? Is going to really open up, I would say, a good conversation once you're here.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah.
I'm curious to, branching off of this and what you all have said, how would you as investors being on this side want to interact with a founder that might have a negative fact that there is a presence in the US and the global founder did fail? Do you want them to come forth with that? How do you want that conversation to be approached? And how should founders think about talking about their failures to potential investors?
I mean, I think being authentic is incredibly important on the investor side when we're hearing from founders. And at the early stage, we recognize that you will pivot 100 times, 5, whatever it is. You're the company that you set out to build won't necessarily be the company that you end up building. And that's totally okay. Just being honest along the way, asking for help, asking for feedback. We want to support that journey, the good days, especially the bad days. So just being authentic and honest and excited about what you're building. If you have that energy behind it, we have more faith and trust that you're really going to build something great.
Awesome. I know we're now coming up to time. So any final thoughts, advice for founders looking to work with operating partners or for people who are thinking about becoming operator investors in the future? I love if we can even just go down the line and offer a few words of advice. Julian, you are closest to me if you're ready to kick us off.
And you had the title, so it's on your
did.
LinkedIn bio.
So I think, I mean, the parting thought I'd like to leave people with is if you're a founder, look for non-traditional sources of capital, particularly those organizations or people who bring tremendous operating experience or domain knowledge or relationships within the industry that you're in. There's a lot of different places to go for capital. Like in my current company, our lead investors, none of them are full-time, venture investors, right? They all have other things that they're doing that are relevant to us. And so it's almost like from the get-go, we have strategic investors, which is very interesting, right? For an early stage business.
Yeah, and I guess my take on this is, as a founder, and if you're looking for operators to add value, just kind of understand what category they fit in. And so sometimes an operator will bring a ton of value because they know the industry, in which case then, they know the players, they understand the dynamics. Sometimes an operating partner will bring functional expertise that you don't have, right? And so if you're super technical and the operator just understands how to go to market, that's a nice fit. And other times that operator might be just well known in a particular industry, in which case they don't actually need to add that much value or spend that much time, but they can open a lot of doors. Right. And so just as you think about working with operator partners, like, understand what your needs are and just make sure those things are aligned with what the operator can bring to the table.
Yeah, I think we've touched on this throughout this discussion, but just to double tap, really do your diligence. Make sure they're not just capital providers, but they're really aligned with the journey that you want to be on, and they're willing to roll up the sleeves. And you can get that through testimonials. So do your diligence. That's my only advice.
Yeah, for fear of repeating too much. One thing I might just toss out there. I agree with everything that my colleagues up here on the panel have said. When I think about sort of our ideal founder, it's somebody who is building something new and exciting and disruptive, and understands what working with angels is like in very specific terms, and how that is different from venture or private equity, and different ways. Even grants, for example, are different ways. There are so many ways to think about going after capital, and just being really thoughtful about what's going to work for you, and recognizing what stage you're in and what you need today may shift and change, just like your company's going to pivot. Your goals right now, make sure you just tap into people and ask a lot of questions so that you can find that.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you all so much for joining. I'll hand it back over as we wrap up, but lots of nuggets here of wisdom for both founders, current investors, and prospective future operator investors. So thank you all.
Let's give it up for our moderator and panelists.